Hello again, you guys. Welcome back to the channel. It is Comic Kid here again, and today we are looking at the 10 best superhero death stories. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention that this list is not specifically limited to like the best character deaths overall. It is specifically looking at stories that feature the actual character's death. And so even though like Superboy dies in Infinite Crisis, and you could consider that to be one of the best deaths, the story itself does not revolve around his death, and so this one's a bit more oriented to the actual death of the character. It will feature some Elseworlds lists, it will feature characters who were dead for like 2 seconds, but it is much more a best last stories of the character than a best or most heroic deaths in all of comics, if that makes sense. But that is about it in terms of the intro, and so we will go ahead and get started. As always, before we do so, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check out the links in the description as well. It really helps out the channel. But to kick things off, we will start with the Dark Phoenix Saga. Now, the storyline had been building for quite some time when Chris Claremont took over X-Men, and everything kind of worked out really nicely for him in this story. He really kind of took Jean Grey and just elevated her to one of the top tier, most powerful Marvel characters. And given everything that had happened to Jean leading up to her death, everything just kind of wrapped up really nicely. There's a reason so many people still recommend this story today. Now, it does rank a little lower just because they have brought her back and killed her again and again and again just so many times. And don't get me wrong, the point is obviously that this is what happens with a Phoenix. It's just a constant cycle of death and rebirth, but the number of times that this has been done is it does take away from the initial moment, in my opinion. That doesn't mean that her original death is bad by any means or diminished or anything like that. I just feel like it's been done so often. Like in Phoenix War Song or End Song, they even make almost a joke where it's like, oh, Jean's back, let's go get her again. And so that is the only reason it is in the bottom spot. But again, there is no denying that it was just one of the high points in X-Men at the time and in all of X-Men, despite the fact that it was such a low point for her character. Now, coming in at number 9 is going to be the death of Superman. Now, while I do feel like there are certainly stronger Death of Superman stories than this one, there's no denying the impact that this story had on all of comics. And what makes it so good is that it's so important to comic book history. Killing off a character like Superman showed that no one was safe in comics. And then obviously his resurrection opened the door for anyone to come back as well. And so while Death of Superman may not be one of my favorite stories, it is still incredibly well written. I absolutely love Dan Jurgens' Superman, and there's really no denying just how important this moment is for comic book history. In the number 8 spot though, we have Daredevil End of Days. Now this one actually doesn't really feature the death of Matt Murdock so much as what Hell's Kitchen looks like after he's gone. And I actually thought this was an incredibly emotional story. It features plenty of Daredevil's supporting cast, and it's just a wonderful look at the legacy this character leaves behind. Brian Michael Bendis, who is really known for his Daredevil run, told this story beautifully, and so if you guys haven't had a chance to check out Daredevil End of Days, it is a wonderful, wonderful read. Now, next up, we have the death of Barry Allen in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, Crisis is more of an event-type story, but it's kind of become a joke in DC now, where it's not a crisis without the death of a Flash of sorts. And, you know, Barry Allen was dead for an incredibly long time in the books after this point. It wasn't until Flash Rebirth that the character was officially brought back into like the main fold of the DC universe and whatnot, and so Crisis proved to be a very important and impactful story. Obviously, it was the first major reboot for the DC universe, and yes, you can dispute that, but most people would consider it the first major reboot for the universe. And so being without Barry Allen from that point on certainly meant a lot to a lot of people. And for how long he was dead as well, like, yeah, and everything about it was well written. He went out in a wonderful way. He still died as a great hero, and there's a reason people consider Crisis on Infinite Earths to be an essential read. Speaking of importance, Death in the Family is next in our list. For those of you who are unfamiliar, this is the one to kill off Jason Todd as Robin. Now, I'm sure if you've read this story before, you probably know a bit of the history, where how like the audience and readers actually got to vote on whether Robin lived or died or not, and then he was actually supposed to live, and there was a whole bunch of stuff, and people were actually genuinely shocked, as well as DC themselves, that they killed off such a young character. Child deaths in comics weren't really, and I guess still aren't, super common, and so for Jason Todd to die was kind of a big deal, especially at the time. And nowadays, you know, he's back as Red Hood, and he's one of the more popular DC characters once again, but to this day, the story still holds up really, really well. Jim Starlin just told a wonderful, wonderful story, and this remains one of the most important and impactful moments in all of Batman history as well. So if you're ever in the mood for kind of a downer of a book, then Death in the Family would certainly be a good one. Now, from one death of a Robin to another, Rise of the Batman in Detective Comics is actually a really, really good death as well. This was the first arc in DC's Rebirth line for Detective Comics and was written by James Tynion and illustrated by Eddie Barrows. But this arc actually features the death of Tim Drake. Now, for those of you who have read it, obviously know that Tim actually doesn't die from this event, but more so is kidnapped by Mr. Oz, and there's a whole bunch of backstory there that we're just not gonna get into right now. But the actual way that Tim dies, quotey fingers, is one of the most wonderfully written deaths for any character that I can think of. James Tynion just tells an incredibly sad story in this moment while keeping things super action-packed and just showing how badass Tim Drake actually is. Especially ever since Damian entered the picture, I feel like Tim has kind of been put on the back burner, and I really appreciate Tynion's attention to Tim Drake throughout this arc, because he really showcased just how wonderful a character Tim can be, and to just see him go out in such a manner as this one just breaks my heart every time I read it. And so if y'all have not had a chance to check out this one, I would absolutely highly, highly recommend it. Now, next up on this list is going to be Death of Ultimate Spider-Man. This one is again by Brian Michael Bendis, with Mark Bagley back on the art to kind of bring their Ultimate Spider-Man Peter Parker story to a close. After several years of just an incredible run, it was actually like pretty scary just knowing they were gonna kill off the character. Now, fortunately for as heartbreaking a story as this one, it did give us Miles Morales as a result of it, and so there was some good to come out of this story as well. But of all Death of Spider-Man stories that have been told over the years, Death of Ultimate Spider-Man is easily my favorite. It's especially heartbreaking to see such a young version of Peter Parker pass away as well, and just his final moments with Aunt May, and just seeing everyone kind of come to his rescue as best they can in the end, just it gets me a little teary-eyed just every single time. And I really was kind of hoping for a moment like this in No Way Home, where he could be like, no, you don't get it. Like, I couldn't save Ben, but I was able to save you. I was just really hoping for a moment like that in No Way Home, and I'm not at all disappointed by what we did get, but I just really feel like this scene in Death of Ultimate Spider-Man would have worked so well for Tom Holland's Spider-Man specifically. But aside from that, it is still a wonderful, wonderful read. You can just jump into it, I would say, as long as you're like a fan of Spider-Man and Marvel and you know who some of the other characters in the story would be, but it's definitely going to hit you a lot harder if you've read Ultimate Spider-Man from start to finish as well. Now, to get into the top 3, in the number 3 spot, we have Silver Surfer Requiem. I feel like this one is going to be a bit more of a niche story for some of you guys. I'm sure not a lot of people have read it and maybe even heard of it. But this one actually caught me by surprise. I would not say that I am a Silver Surfer fan at all. I don't dislike the character by any means, but I have never really cared to begin with. And so I picked it up because I saw it was written by J. Michael Straczynski and had Asad Ribic on the art, and I absolutely love both of these two. And so I gave it a shot, and boy was I very, very pleasantly surprised. Given that I don't really know too much about Silver Surfer, I thought this was a tremendously wonderful and just one of the saddest stories I think I have ever read. Essentially, the title of Herald of Galactus has started to poison Norrinrad, and so it's basically him kind of tying up all the loose ends in his life before his eventual passing. And I'm not sure if it's on Comixology or Marvel Unlimited or anything like that, but if it is, you guys, I promise you, you will not be disappointed by this story. It is wonderful. And with art by Asad Ribic as well, it is an especially gorgeous book, and I would definitely say it's got the best art out of any other on this list. Now, in the number 2 spot, we have Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. This one was written by Alan Moore towards the start of Crisis on Infinite Earths, basically as they wound down the old DC universe and cleared way for the new one. This was their way of kind of bringing that version of Superman to a close, quotey fingers. And I feel like most Superman fans will tell you that this is one of the best Superman stories ever written. Like, even to this day, this story really holds up. And to get into some slight spoilers, it's not exactly a Death of Superman story, but it is a Death of Superman story at the same time. Like, the character does cease to exist by the end of it. And so that is why it is on this list and in the number 2 spot. And it just does a wonderful job of featuring Superman's supporting cast, a wide array of villains, and some surprising twists and turns as well. Now, finally, in the number 1 spot, with no relation to the prior one, we have Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader. This one was written by Neil Gaiman towards the Final Crisis storyline, and as DC kind of wound down their Batman and made way for Dick Grayson and Batwoman, Neil Gaiman kind of brought Bruce Wayne's story to a quotey fingers close. Now, obviously, we know Bruce was sent back in time and brought back, but this storyline still served as kind of a resolution and a potential end, so to speak, to Batman as an overall character. Now, there were a few things in this story that some people didn't agree with, one of them being Alfred as the Joker, but the point of the overall story is that there's really no end to Batman. And so for all the possibilities that he's trying to make sense of as the story progresses, nothing technically matters while everything matters. But what really makes this story so wonderful and just lands it in the number 1 spot for me is this one small page with Joker. And it is one of the best Batman Joker interactions like I could have possibly imagined. Like, I could not have imagined it. Like, the way Neil Gaiman portrays this scenario was just so wonderful in my opinion. And if you do know his stuff from works like Good Omens or Sandman or anything that he could have written, of all of Gaiman's works, I actually feel like this is one of my favorite things he has ever done. And so, yeah, absolutely everything on this list I would highly, highly recommend for you guys. Some of them are going to be more important to continuity than others, but if you're just looking for a good story, then all of these foot the bill perfectly. But that is everything for today, you guys. As always, thank y'all so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe as well. And be sure to say hi to my friends over at Next Issue Podcast as well. But that is it for today, and I will see you guys again real soon.